Hello and welcome back to Double Shot of Tea with your hosts Tyler and Thomas.
What up?
We're bringing you match week 15 and 16 and a 2020 review for you as this is New Year's Eve and we are saying goodbye to 2020 finally and hoping that 2021 brings in a better year than 2020. But I have a lot to cover today.
Yeah, a
And
lot's
welcome.
been going on, and excited to put this year behind us as, a citizen, but also as an Arsenal fan. Hasn't been the best year for Arsenal and definitely not for anybody. So I think the past 2 weeks we've seen a lot of things kind of happen quickly just because there's been so many points up for grabs, um, with 3 games happening in quick succession. And then over the past, week or so, having those 2 more games over the holiday period, we've seen Manchester United kind of solidify themselves as real contenders here. Manchester City have obviously had another game canceled, so now they're sort of looking in this weird position where they have a couple of games in hand. Arsenal obviously have started to put a couple of wins in the bank, and Spurs have obviously come into a little bit of trouble as they were firing pretty well earlier on. So definitely a couple of things that have been changing. But just with COVID in general, I know you wanted to touch on that. How
Yeah.
do you feel Spurs had a game canceled with Fulham because of positive tests on Fulham's end? Jose Mourinho obviously put out that really funny video of him and the coaching staff of Spurs like in the lobby saying that they have a game at 6 p.m. and they don't know if it's happening or
Yeah.
not, and
Yeah,
this is the
best
best league
league
in
in
the
the
world.
world. Yeah. Yeah, so he was pretty upset about that, and Tottenham as well. It kind of gives them a bit of an advantage though, now that they have 5 days rest going into the game versus Leeds. But
Definitely.
yeah, I mean, definitely there has been no communication between clubs in terms of COVID, in terms of the Premier League. It seems like it's just been one way. Everton also saw this with their game versus Manchester City postponed, and they weren't happy because they found out about Kyle Walker testing positive for COVID
It was
from the
5 City
media.
players, right? So
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
know which play? I haven't seen which
I know
specific play.
one
I know
was
Kyle
Kyle
Walker.
Walker. Yeah, and but Everton basically they're upset because they found out via the media. They didn't know. There was no communication from City. There was no communication from the Premier League until they found out themselves. And it was the same with Fulham and Spurs, and that's kind of where the frustrations are coming from Jose Mourinho, I think, because they were up until 3 hours before the match. They were ready to go. They had trained like they were going to play the match, and then they called it. And in my
Yeah, and
opinion,
that's
they could have done it
definitely.
the day before. Yeah,
I think the communication is the big issue. I don't
yeah,
think anybody has any issue with the games needing to be postponed. Um, Obviously, I know Arteta was asked about it, and he is somebody who has contracted coronavirus. Obviously, he kind of was the first big
yeah,
name in the Premier League to contract it. And um, I mean, the safety of the players and the staff and everybody around is going to be the priority, as well as, everybody in their bubble. This doesn't just affect the players. They have families, they see people in their day-to-day lives that are obviously going to be affected too. And with, like the fixture congestion of the past couple of weeks, there was always going to be so much contact between the players that if, anything slipped under the radar, which is going to happen with the way that this virus expresses itself and doesn't express itself, and can be latent within people. um and so I mean, I don't think this is surprising, and I think that everybody's on the same side here, that we want to take precautions, but we also, this is a huge reprieve from everything going on for the fan base, and we want to be able to continue the Premier League, but do it in a safe way and a responsible way. And what that's going to take is a lot of communication from all parties. And so I understand Everton's frustration, and Jose Mourinho's frustration, which is just a lack of communication. I'm sure Manchester City told the Premier League that Kyle Walker had contracted COVID. I'm sure they weren't trying to hide that fact. But definitely, it seems like the Premier League is trying to keep everything under wraps until it kind of makes its decision, which doesn't really seem like the best way to take the safest and fairest measures if you're not including everybody in the conversation. So,
And also with some calls for a circuit breaker period by the very entertaining Big Sam, who is now back coaching at West Brom. But
getting
I
some
think he's
results, two
yeah
pretty polarizing results with a draw
yeah
to Liverpool,
yeah
and then subsequently a 5-0
six
smattering, 6-0
six
smattering from Leeds. So
yeah and but Sam has been, in my opinion, one of the signs of light in terms of the managers. You saw him wearing a mask on the sideline a bit. He's really been the only manager I've seen that's been doing that. But he's also called for a circuit breaker period where you get 1 or 2 weeks where the Premier League just stops, everybody isolates, and then you come back. And
it's
obviously,
funny.
that would be beneficial for him as he is now the new manager of West Brom. That would buy him some time. But also, I think it's not the worst idea in terms of, kind of hit and reset, especially with the new year coming in.
I was just
But
saying it's
yeah,
kind of funny with Big Sam being, the big proponent of safety and regulations, just because it's in such a stark contrast to the way that he plays. You think of him as being such a dinosaur, and he plays a very conservative style way, and it's very much gritty and for the results, and people are getting hurt, and it's not maybe the most um, benevolent and you know altruistic football style, but then he's really a man of the people when it comes to things that actually matter. So I just thought that contrast was funny because you definitely
yeah,
wouldn't expect, especially with all of these younger managers, people who are very forthcoming, guys like Arteta, Lampard, um, some of the younger managers in the who have definitely said stuff about coronavirus, and talked about it. But I do think that Sam has taken it to the level that it probably needs to. Um, and like all of the stuff that was with like players not celebrating and not high-fiving and has kind of been put to the wayside. And there's not even really this theater that they were putting on in the beginning of we're trying really hard to mitigate any spread and do everything we can, which obviously was only going to be theater. These guys are playing on the field. They're going to be in contact with each other. But I mean, I do think it is better to remind people that this is something that everybody is conscious of, instead of it just seems like everything's kind of slipped by the wayside here.
yeah, definitely. And it's going to be tough. The circuit breaker period obviously is not very likely to happen.
Well,
So
they
we're kind
they
of just
announced that it specifically wasn't going to happen,
yeah,
which I think is a weird thing to say. Why would you say it
yeah.
wasn't going to, like, you have to wait and see? I mean, if it gets worse, it has to happen.
Mm,
So I don't know. It just seems like that attitude of like, well, we're going to do it no matter what. And, you can just see the money in their eyes. Um, but I mean, it is,
yeah,
something that we
and
just have to
there's
wait and see what happens here.
yeah, and the longer the decision is delayed, I think the more, you know, the lower league teams get hurt. Like we've now seen with the teams in the FA Cup, they're not going to be able to play in front of fans, and that's a huge revenue source for them. So definitely some serious effects happening in terms of COVID. And
Yeah, and also, not in terms of COVID, but just in the terms of how the league is going to be changing. Obviously, COVID is a big effect, but now also just with Brexit, the rules are going to be changing around which players are going to be allowed to get work permits, and how that's all going to come into play. So really, for lower league clubs, it's going to be very difficult to acquire any sort of international player, because usually if you're buying an international player and you're not in the top division, you're not buying a player who's playing for his national team and is going to have kind of the pedigree that's required, that's going to be required for new international players, foreign players. So we're going to see a lot more English only teams in those lower leagues, which when you look at a team like Leeds that's just come up, obviously a lot of those players are not um, it's not an English only team. They have players from all over the place. Um, And so it's going to be difficult for a team like that to exist. And so that's just going to be interesting too. And I don't know if it's for the best really. For the
Yeah,
players you
that
think of, Arsenal specifically, Cesc Fabregas came over, Hector Bellerin, Serge Gnabry. A lot of players were introduced to Arsenal that they are no longer going to be able to bring on.
especially in terms of youth players as well. And we kind of have seen teams snatching up youth players before, this deadline has happened, with United getting Diallo, and with Manchester City, they signed a player from Partizan. So,
and
you can
and
see
vice
teams are.
versa, right? You
Mhm.
see Dortmund snapping up a lot of English talent, right? They have Jadon Sancho. Um, you see, Ademola Lookman obviously had his taste over there in the Bundesliga. We've seen Bayern Munich now with Musiala. It and a couple of
Bellingham
different
and
players, Angel Gomes, as
Dortmund,
well
yeah.
as Marcus Edwards, Bellingham. Obviously, there's a lot of players in the youth system of England that are going to be moving abroad because this is not a two-way street. Those English players are still going to be able to go to Germany and play. Um, so I do think overall this is going to be hurtful to the English leagues, and I wouldn't be surprised if in 4 or 5 years' time we're going to see the penalties of it, because nothing is going to stop these teams from taking English young players, and if it's not going to happen both ways, then England is just going to be at a net negative, I think, for talented youth.
Hmm. Hmm. Can definitely see that. And also, with Serie A as well, capitalizing on foreign signings, particularly youth ones. But yeah, let's focus now on, I think, the main news from the Premier League, aside from all of the COVID related issues and news. We have Manchester United's Edinson Cavani has recently been given a 3-match ban and a £100,000 fine for his social media post, which contained a Spanish offensive phrase. And this was after his goal versus Southampton that won the game. And he made an ill-advised social media post, and now he will be serving a 3-match ban. So
Yeah,
a
and
big hit to them, and
I
really
think the main
stupid. Yeah,
complaint with the way the FA handled it is they took a long time of deliberation, and their
they did.
statement afterwards kind of absolved Cavani of a lot of the guilt, or not a lot of, but I mean, it wasn't really
They really played it
condemning
down.
his behavior, yet the ban is longer than, say, Bernardo Silva, who posted a racist image, as well as you can think of Dele Ali when he had that Snapchat that came up where he was being racist towards Asian people in regards to the
Mhm.
coronavirus. And they were both given 1 match suspensions and no fine. And you have to say, when you compare the three incidences, I don't think Cavani's is gravely different from either of them. I think none of that should be allowed. And I think the penalty for all three should be um, I think these penalties really need to be explained in advance to players, because I think, right, Cavani obviously did not understand Bernardo. So these are foreign players. Dele Ali, I mean, really no excuse there. But there is this sense that there's not really um, a consensus on what the punishment should be and what the proper response from the FA and the players should be. Um, First of all, there's no reason these players shouldn't be getting some sort of training on, um, sensitivity around race and differences. These are people who are working in very international environments. You wouldn't expect any company to have that sort of employee base and not do some sort of training or explanation of, this is what is acceptable behavior and this is not that that absolves anyone who acts in a racist manner. But I do think that the FA is playing a little cat and mouse with trying to take these incidences as they arise, instead of laying out a solid groundwork as well as an educational foundation for these players to become less racist, and create an environment that enables other players to feel comfortable in it. The the responsibility is on the owners of the league, is on the FA to create that environment, and then to make sure that all the players are adhering to it. They're kind of refusing to do anything other than sort of, for show things. They're not laying down a real solid rubric of how they want their players to act, and I think that needs to happen now.
Yeah, without a question. So keep eyes on the developments with that and the ongoing rules and regulations associated with that. But I think now we can start reviewing some of these games. Um, we passed through a lot of games in the past few days. Obviously, with some of the postponements, we had some off, but I mean, tons of games, a lot of craziness in terms of the match week 15 games, a lot of goals in comparison to 16, where we didn't really see that many. In 16, we saw almost every game had under 2 expected goals,
A lot of
uh,
draws, so many draws
including the
that
six
day.
nothing win as well. So yeah, a lot of draws, a lot of 1-0, 0-0. Um, United with their
Which
late
I think
goal.
fatigue is obviously taking a
Mm-hmm.
huge precedent. You could see, especially I think with Liverpool in that last game against Newcastle, right at the end of the match, there was 4 or 5 minutes added on, and I don't think Liverpool played the ball forward. It was just going in between their midfielders and their defenders, and you have to think that they just looked totally gassed. You know what I mean? They didn't not
Mm-hmm.
want to win, and they weren't thinking that was the best way to go, but they didn't have enough energy in the tank to do anything other than retain the ball. Newcastle played really well in that match. Liverpool obviously struggling a little bit with 2 draws over this period. I think this is really where the depth of the team comes into play here. And Liverpool, obviously, with all of their injuries and missing players, just don't have the luxury right now of rotation. Diogo Jota obviously has been a huge miss for them because he was really providing a lot of attacking impetus. Um, and it just seems a little bit stale from them. They brought in Thiago at the end of the match, and it didn't seem like he did much either to change their fortunes going forward. So they have a very small front line, so it's not like they can kind of just go Hail Mary and play Route One and smash balls into the box. They have to kind of play that build up style, and when the players are tired, it kind of falls apart.
That definitely happened with the Liverpool, second half against West Brom, where really in the first half West Brom didn't create anything at all. Liverpool was dominating; they were up 1-0. It looked really good, but then they really weren't able to create high quality chances after that. And in the second half, um, they were punished off the set piece and the great header by Semi Ajayi. But Mohamed Salah, I think the fatigue is really setting in for him. It was the lowest total XG he's accumulated since coming back from coronavirus, and it was
And that's
0.17
definitely
against West Brom.
something else that has been true, is that coronavirus, even when it hasn't had symptoms, asymptomatic coronavirus has still had a large effect on professional athletes. We've seen that with Ronaldo. I think we're seeing that with Salah, and we've seen it pretty much across the board. If you're performing at that high of a level, anything that affects your body is, you need to be at 100%, even when the players are at, 90%, they're not going to be scoring every game and have that extra burst to get past other players. So I think that it's going to be a case of, if a lot of these players are going to be contracting the virus, and we're going to, because players have, 3 players at Arsenal just contracted it, or Gabriel at least contracted it, and David Luiz and Willian were close enough in his bubble that they had to sit out as well. So not only are we going to see players missing games, and teams having to be able to adapt, but we're also, I think, going to see players coming back and not firing on all cylinders if they did catch the virus, because it's going to just affect their physical ability going forward.
Yeah, and a lot of tough, mental effects as well in terms of just this whole pandemic. on the players. But yeah, we saw some more tough defending from Spurs. I kind of want to talk about their game versus Wolves, which was a 1-1 draw, and it was, as a Spurs fan, it was a really tough draw. It felt like a loss. In the first minute, Tanguy and Dombele scored a goal, which probably should have been saved by Rui Patricio. However, this was the best game I have seen from Tanguy and Dombele the entire season. He controlled the game, he dominated. But as the thing with Spurs that we've seen time and time again this season is they just sit back and they're satisfied with the 1-0 lead. And it came back to bite them with the Roman Saiz header goal in the 86th minute. And Roman Saiz is one of those guys that we call the set piece master. He was pretty much unguarded on that set piece, and he is by far their best player in the air. So having one shot on target after the 21st minute, and it coming from an Eric Dyer free kick that was not even close. It wasn't even on target. So it was just shambolic, I think, and you can't be satisfied with that if you're a Spurs fan. I think it was ridiculous.
The big thing that I think was really damning for Mourinho in this game is the fact that Wolves have lost Raul Jimenez and they have been struggling for any offensive output. They really have not had goals come easily to them since Raul Jimenez has left. The fact that Saiz scored off of a set piece seems predictable, like you're saying, and the fact that Jose Mourinho didn't use that fact to be a little bit more aggressive and build on the momentum of a goal coming so early was not only disheartening to Spurs fans, but I think just a poor choice in pragmatism. It didn't make sense to score one goal and then sit back against a team that had really no offensive output. Why wouldn't you challenge them and try to stretch the game out and take a little bit of the pressure off of yourselves by going for it when you know that they really don't have that much capability and offensive output anyway? They were never scoring 2-3 goals. If Spurs had just tried to score another goal, I think it would have been beyond Wolves to get to have like a 2-goal, 3-goal run in that game.
And this has been a theme with Spurs even before Jose Mourinho. Spurs have always, started games well, looked good, and then in the end blown it and come out, on the wrong side of the game. And within Mourinho's tenure at Spurs, Spurs have dropped 9 points this season with goals conceded in the last 10 minutes of the match. So this is the most of any in the Premier League. So
well, 3 of those came in one game, right?
Right. Well, that's true with the West Brom, but still, that's.
It seems like that game kind of broke them a little bit. I mean,
you're dropping
I don't know
9 points. Dropping 9 points when you could have them. I mean, that's tough. Turning them into 3 or 0, it's not good. And Jose needs to wake up and see that. And I hope that for Spurs, this unfortunate given rest period due to the positive coronavirus cases on Fulham's side will, provide somewhat of a respite in this congested.
And they're playing
schedule.
Leeds, right on the 2nd.
Yep.
And Leeds are really coming into good form right now. And they have a lot of offensive ability, but they also seem like a team that Tottenham is just going to absolutely dominate on the counter. It'll definitely be an interesting game because you almost never see an open Tottenham game. They're usually very closed off, and Bielsa has this ability to just stretch the game and kind of force an exciting game. So I'm interested to see how that's going to unfold, especially knowing that Tottenham have this extra rest. Leeds are, they use Bielsa uses the same players every single week, regardless of anything. So they're coming in hot, but they also are going to be tired. So it'll be an interesting game to unfold. I think the fortune of Spurs since the North London derby, which was pretty much the last game where they looked really, really good and comfortable, has oppositely mirrored how Arsenal have been doing since that match, right? They drew a very strong Southampton team. um, despite getting a red card. And I think that that was sort of a turning point. They obviously struggled against Everton, but I think, portions of that Everton match were really positive going forward. And then obviously they just this week had a 3-1 victory over Chelsea, which was unbelievable. Um, I know a lot of people have, lamented the fact that the penalty was a little bit soft on Kieran Tierney. Um, Obviously, Xhaka scored a free kick. I don't know what anybody could have any complaints about that free kick goal. It was fantastic. And then Bukayo Saka had a goal at the end to make it 3-0. That was potentially a cross gone awry, even though he has made a lot of points to claim it, much to Jack Grealish's amusement on social media. But I think if you watch the game, there were multiple chances where Arsenal didn't have their finishing boots, and were very, very close to scoring. I think they could have had 6-7 more opportunities, and two of the goals, right, the Xhaka free kick goal and Bukayo Saka's goal, came from a pattern of play, which was Saka turning a player high up the field and then driving into the space on that right wing. Obviously, the youthful connection of Emil Smith-Rowe, Martinelli, and Saka has given Arsenal this impetus to go on the bounce and win 2 games here. But Saka on that right wing has just been revelational. He's got 5 starts on the right wing, and he's got 2 goals and 3 assists. He really has the ability to craft himself to the role. I think he was phenomenal as a left wing back. He was very good as a left winger. But I think right wing is really his best position in terms of his ability to just drift beyond players and then drive into that space. And we saw that happen to get himself the freedom to make that goal, even if it were lucky, and to also get a free kick in a promising area for Xhaka's free kick goal. And then on the only goal that Arsenal scored in the next match, he drove past the Brighton left back and just used his pace and his he kind of received the ball, brought in the left back, and then made a really good turn, and then just a nice turn of pace to scream down the line, which Graham Potter even gave kudos for, and then just put in a really nice pass for Lacazette, who was able to put in a really nice finish at the near post, using the defender to kind of hide his shot with a lot of finesse and curve. And so it's good for Lacazette to be coming back into form for Arsenal. It's good to see the young players replace the players who we haven't seen do well. And it's also nice to see Pablo Mari come in, replacing Gabriel, who obviously has coronavirus, and make that left center back position look solid. So a lot of positives for Arsenal, who I just saw a stat from Orbinho that if they win their next match here on January 2nd against West Brom, against Big Sam's West Brom, I believe, they will have 1 more point than they did last season under Unai Emery, which I think it would be
Improvement.
a positive. It would be pretty impressive seeing that we lost 8 games this season. So.
And I want to also shout out, the young players coming in, like you were talking about as well. Emil Smith-Rowe and Gabriel Martinelli both, have come into the team and provided a nice injection to Arteta's side, and I think it's been really welcome, especially when Arteta was kind of trying Lacazette out as a 10. He seems to now have a more solid player in Smith-Rowe, and we'll see how he develops. He's an
Yeah, and
exciting
you
young
can
player.
see them pushing on. You see Martinelli, Kieran Tierney, and Emil Smith-Rowe in the second game against Brighton were all yelling at Aubameyang at different points to press and to play quicker. And Aubameyang has obviously not been in any form since he signed his new contract. Um, and even when he came back in that Brighton game, he had glimpses where, the finishing touch wasn't there, but he looked more lively than he has in previous games. And I think he knows that there's competition for those places now. Lacazette is in form. Martinelli has literally changed the entire Arsenal team, I think, by coming in. He's the best by far in terms of attacking player pressures. And Emil Smith-Rowe is, had 7 tackles in his game against Chelsea was just, I mean, 7 ball recoveries. They've just been all over the place and just implementing Arteta's press, and it's been really just very positive from Arsenal. I think they had a first half that did not look good against Brighton, but in the second half they immediately started creating chances. Um, and it's just
Aubameyang
been,
had a really, really bad miss from a great pass from Saka in the second half that I was
yeah.
so shocked. I mean, he was saved, but I really think he should have put that one away. And then, Lacazette coming in 29 seconds and he scores. So, it's a nice injection for him. Was he subbed for Aubameyang?
No, he subbed on for Martinelli, who,
Okay.
I think I was surprised that he even started because he's obviously coming back from a long-term injury.
Yeah. And he got
And
that knock his first. Yeah.
he's had a lot of time, and he had a really close chance that just went over the bar, and he's just looked phenomenal. He just has that Alexis Sanchez energy to him, where he's looks like he's giving 110%, and I think that makes other players feel like they look shittier, and so they better kind of get it into gear. And he's obviously just still a teenager here. So Lacazette said that one of the questioners after the game asked him if the younger players were kind of giving him life and giving him energy, and he was like, they make me feel really old, um, which is true. I mean, he's 28, but these guys are 10 years his junior, and are kind of turning Arsenal's season around single-handedly. So really exciting stuff from Arsenal. But Arsenal aren't the only team that have had good fortune over this period, right? With Manchester United inching up the table, and kind of leading up to a Manchester United-Liverpool match that is going to maybe, at the end of the season look like a title decider.
And they had a late winner against Wolves, and I just want to share this image here of Donny van de Beek. If you remember, Manchester United signed this player. But yeah, he's looking pretty good here. But this is him on the bench, not coming in. So tough for him. But United did get that late goal against Wolves. I thought in that game I was really, really impressed with Ryan Aït-Nouri as well as Key Jana Hoover on the opposing
A lot of
outside back.
new players, and kind of a lot of substitutions from the Wolves side for that game. They obviously were taking into account the fixture congestion list here, and I think we're one of the few teams, along with Brighton, and some of it seems like a lot of the teams at the top end of the table who have the ability to rotate a lot more because of the depth of quality didn't rotate at all, and all of the teams sort of in the middle and the bottom of the table that have really a bang on first 11 and then backup players, brought in a lot of new faces into the fold. And I think those players did look good for Wolves. And I was also impressed with some of the players that came on for Brighton that don't usually get a shout, like Bernardo.
Yeah, I thought, with the United game, I think we got to bring this up and how good this guy has been. I thought versus Wolves did a really good job of shutting him down. Obviously, not, at the end there with the unfortunate goal from off of Saiss. It was the Rashford shot, but of course, who assisted it? This guy, Bruno. He's been fantastic this season. It's in this whole year, he's been probably the best player since he came on to United, and it's been unfortunate if you don't like Manchester United because every game this guy is killing it.
I mean, he's so talented, and I think it really is something that the number 10 classic role, right? We've seen Mesut Ozil, Juan Mata, a lot of these, James Rodriguez, while he was at Real Madrid, a lot of these types of players have really fallen out of fashion. And Bruno Fernandes has really made that role his own and has kind of, Kevin De Bruyne, and a couple of players like that have reinvented the number 10 role to be more of an all action midfield role, while still having the precision and the flair to pick out these inch perfect passes and create these chances. And when you have a player like that in your team, it always gives you a chance um, to beat any opposition just because Bruno Fernandes is able to put people on a plate and create chances. And not only does that give his teammates a lot of confidence when he gets the ball at his feet, that they can move forward and start creating those beyond the ball runs that are going to cause problems for teams. But it's also, I think you can see teams getting nervous just because they know he has so much quality on the ball, and that even if you give him a second of time, he could pick out somebody's head and kind of create an unstoppable situation there. So he's just been unbelievable, I'd say, along, Bruno Fernandes, Jack Grealish, and Heung-min Son for me have probably been the top three players in the Premier League so far this season.
Yeah, and you gotta give a credit to Bruno coming in and being a number 10 in a league that the number 10 has kind of fallen out in, and he's come back and really brought it in. And obviously Kevin De Bruyne, like you said, he's the emblematic 10. When we look here, he was the most creative player by a mile in 2020 in terms of his minutes per his expected assists per 90. So this is where Bruno is here, similar minute levels.
Surprising, I think,
You know,
to see Che Adams so high up the table.
yeah,
He's a
Che
player that
Adams,
we
yeah,
love, but
yeah,
he's just like,
and
he's such an enigmatic player because he's so klutzy, and he's got, like, he's not a passer of the ball. If you look at all of these players, they're incredible passers of the ball. But Che Adams, what he does really well is he's a space creator. He's more of a Raumdautor. He's kind of like a poor man's Thomas Muller. He's not really going to be the technical, you know, through the eye of a needle pass, but he does receive the ball in so many dangerous situations, and then it kind of bounces off of him into other
well,
players' paths. He's a really funny player.
yeah, he is funny. And the Athletic Zonal Marking podcast once dubbed him a Harry Kane light. But looking at this and the creations, I mean, where is Harry? He's down here.
It's
And
really impressive to see Harry Kane, Jack Grealish so far down, because
mhm,
when I think of creators, I think of Jack Grealish every single
yeah,
match, right? He is
mhm,
so creative, and I think if you just watch any Aston Villa game, you usually see him creating multiple opportunities in both halves, right? Every time he gets on the ball, he's a danger. And then you think of how many clear-cut opportunities that Harry Kane has created for Heung-min Son this season. I'm surprised not to see them higher up the list.
yeah, and, definitely, definitely. But we've also seen some great goals and low expected goals being scored from those passes that Harry plays to Son. That they've been
Yeah, and I mean that
fantastic.
definitely is the explanation there, but I
Hmm.
also think um it's just where the stat gets a little bit blurry, because I think if you, specifically with Jack Grealish, if you watch him play just by the eye test, he looks like one of the top creators
Yeah.
in the league.
Hmm.
So I'm just
Hmm.
surprised to see guys like, Fredericks on West Ham ahead of him. But I do
Hmm.
think it's also telling that you do not see a single Arsenal player in that list. Arsenal, if you look at the assist records in the Premier League, Arsenal have almost all of them, right? Multiple for 4 assists in the league. It's like six Arsenal players in 4 assists in one game. It's like six Arsenal players and Adebayor. And then if you look at just the top assisters throughout the course of the league, right, Mesut Ozil as well as Thierry Henry are the best there. To see no creativity from Arsenal recently has been, I think, one of the defining factors of what has made players, I mean, not players, but what has made fans so disappointed with his team, because Arsenal have always been known as a team that has immense creative potential. And there's really just been none of that this season. But I mean, that's why Manchester United games, even though sometimes they look drab and it doesn't look like they can create, they do have Bruno Fernandes on that team who can just create something out of thin air and has that ability to, have that moment of magic and really take the responsibility to be a playmaker for United. And that's just why I think he is such a special talent.
And what makes United such a, in my opinion, a title contender this season is their individual quality. And we talk about Bruno, but we also got to talk about Wan Bissaka. Pogba. These guys are, they can get the job done. If you look at Wan-Bissaka in terms of true tackle win percentage, um, which takes into account fouls against the player in addition to tackles, head to heads. Wan-Bissaka is at the top. So they've got the best cam, arguably, in terms of taking a look at here with Wan-Bissaka. He's in terms of minutes to true tackle win percentage, like we were saying, that takes into
Do you
fouls
have
against the
like
player.
a strong definition of what a true tackle win percentage is?
Yeah. So I've got the equation here, and this is taking from the 10 Commandments of football analytics from the Athletic. But let me.
This is coming from a higher power here than
Yeah,
us.
this is exactly. But these are the guys and girls that we know that we trust. But here's the equation for true tackles. So this is what it takes into consideration. So total tackles, challenges, lost, fouls when attempting a tackle.
So it's really looking at how many times you attempt a tackle and then what the only possible results from that would be.
Exactly.
And
so the higher percentage, the more success you have.
A little bit more than 3 out of 4 times Wan-Bissaka attempts a tackle, he is winning the ball. Whereas if you look down the line, and these are the people who are the best tacklers in the 2020, the calendar year, right?
Yeah, so when played 900 plus minutes.
When you look across the line, the top 10 seem to be at about 70% and above. For Wan-Bissaka to pretty much be, a full 10% above, the guy in 10th, I think speaks volumes. He is, even from the eye test, an extremely proficient tackler. He has those long telescopic legs, and he has an ability to, I think it's a patience, right? I think a lot of defenders dive quickly and often and early and hard, whereas with Wan-Bissaka, he always seems to be almost behind, trailing a little bit, and then he just gives himself enough space to kind of stretch out a leg and block a cross or block a tackle, and he's just been really important for them. And I think their defensive solidity on that side wins them a lot of possession. I think their left side is not at all formidable. They brought in Alex Telles a little bit to kind of have some offensive output there, but he doesn't have the defensive solidity. And then Luke Shaw just doesn't have the concentration, and I don't think he's at the level for Manchester United to rely on either. So the right side is definitely one of the strongest in the Premier League, but it's the left side that I think, coupled with Maguire, who's had his share of difficulties as well, I think is where teams, tend to hurt United.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Maguire, creating some of their best opportunities in terms of set pieces when you have Bruno playing those balls in. It's it's a good mix, and they're on form now, and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer seems to now have the backing. Not too many doubts.
Still not convincing to me. You know what I mean?
I think you'll see out this season, though, for sure.
I don't think he's in danger of being sacked, and I think it's harsh. You look at Arteta, you look at Lampard, and kind of how he's under the cosh a little bit with the loss to Arsenal and just sort of the recent results and inability to get the team to perform. I think that pretty much everybody is struggling, right? Manchester City are not hitting form. Liverpool are obviously dropping way more points than they did last season. The coronavirus, the fixture congestion, everything is just compounding, I think, and it's making it so that we have a really interesting league this year. But I think that everybody needs to kind of dial it back a little bit in terms of expectations, because this is a season that I think is going to be defined by just, sort of extremes, right? There's going to be a lot of statistical anomalies this season just because of all of the external factors that we've never seen before. And you need to um, just kind of take everything with a little bit of a grain of salt here, because it's hard to really get the results that you want when there's all of these external factors. But I still think when you look at, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's team and the way he sets up, and just the talent at his disposal, that he's pretty disappointing, if you're a Manchester United fan, even though they're obviously doing very well.
Absolutely, and we'll, we'll keep you all posted on how exactly that pans out for Man United, and if they can continue this consistency that they've shown. But I think next we should talk about another quite unconvincing manager as of late, and that is Mr. Frank Lampard. He has not been doing so hot recently in terms of their results, with the 1-1 draw to Aston Villa and the 3-1 loss to Arsenal that we talked about before. To mention Jorginho missing a penalty is pretty rough for them. And in terms of points per game, I want to show you this. So this is looking at 20 plus games for Chelsea managers, and we see Frank Lampard here, 54 games, 1.7, nearing around the same rate as Villas-Boas. Obviously, with more games, you'd expect him to be doing a bit better. So
The PPG is the points per game, but it was upset. Can you show that again for a second?
yeah.
I think Frank, right, last season was definitely a transitional season where they lost Eden Hazard. A lot of players were very young. He was obviously a new manager, et cetera, et cetera. Then he goes off and spends, 200 plus million pounds in the transfer market. And it's a little bit harder to have sympathy for him, um, when he has so many options, especially offensively. And it seems like their biggest struggles are getting the results to go their way, in front of the net, and creating those chances. It seems like what I don't understand about this list is that, does Frank Lampard, it's the points per game of Glenn Hoddle, Ian Porterfeld, and Ruud Gullit are the only ones lower than Lampard. Is that what I'm supposed to understand?
Right, yeah, and that he's about at the same points per game rate as Andre Villas-Boas, who had half the amount of games as him.
Yeah.
And Andre Villas-Boas was obviously looked at as a, not Chelsea's best manager, and was fired. Even
Yeah, I
though,
would be interested to see like what a Jose Mourinho or like an Ancelotti or, a Conte, what their points per game was. I'm sure it's over 2, because obviously they
mhm.
were, winning titles during their time. But I think, showing basically that he's been one of the worst Chelsea managers so far is damning. But I do think, like, if you look at the Andre Villas-Boas team, that he inherited, was probably much stronger than the Chelsea team that Frank Lampard inherited. But then again, where the sympathy kind of ends is then he spent, through 3 transfer windows, an obscene amount of money, got pretty much every single player that he asked for, as well as, players that you wouldn't expect to be easy signings. So
Yeah,
I don't know if he can blame anybody but himself. He brings on Timo Werner, he brings on Kai Havertz, and he plays Timo Werner on the left wing. He plays Kai Havertz on the wing, kind of, as an 8. There's been, but even when he's been playing in the midfield, it hasn't been as a true number 10. It's been sort of in the half spaces on the wing. And we've known him to be most successful as really like a secondary striker, somebody who gets into the box with late runs and can have a finishing touch. He's got good, creative ability, but I wouldn't say he's like a Kevin De Bruyne, Bruno Fernandes type player. He's more of an all action type player who can find his way into the box. So it's a little bit confusing the way Frank has decided to use some of these talismanic players that he's brought on.
and it seems like one of the most consistent players has been Olivier Giroud for Frank, and it's it's pretty interesting seeing, such a veteran with this exciting young team being the one that's kind of carrying them right now. In terms of minutes per goal ratio, Giroud has a goal every 105 minutes. So he's been doing well. Ben Chilwell with the assist to Giroud's goal. That was Chilwell's fourth assist of the season. So they're gelling, but we can't take any credit away, I think, from Aston Villa and Dean Smith and how well he's been doing since Aston Villa hired him. Obviously, keeping them safe last year was huge. He came over from Brentford, and that's what gave the rise to Thomas Frank there, who I'm a huge fan of. But Dean Smith has done absolutely phenomenal so far. They've been one of the most consistent teams, really showing a lot of potential in terms of Bertrand Traore, Matt Cash, um, obviously Jack Grealish. We can't talk about him enough and how great he is. But getting results against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, is something typically unheard of. So for Aston Villa to do it, um, all the credit to Dean Smith, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean they've been fantastic. We've heard stories of Dean Smith showing Aston Villa defenders basically tapes of Liverpool and Lazio, and just kind of going over the roles that they should be taking and how they should be defending. And I think that that's something that you see um, as just a huge change from last season. They're so defensively solid. The players
Yeah,
are all fighting really hard. John McGinn, I think, has been a revelation for them. He's so creative.
only
He's
only one goal conceded in December for Villa. So yeah,
and
they
it's
did
the
have
whole
one
team.
postponed.
It's
Yeah,
front to back.
and they did have one game postponed in December, but still it's 5 games where they've only conceded one goal
And
compared.
games where they're having to play the same players. And it's not like they have a huge depth there. So these guys are running really hard every single game, and then they're having to do it again the next week. Um, and so I just think that he's done a really great job.
And they
And
smacked Crystal Palace too, 3-0 in the prior game, and
Crystal
you
Palace
know,
have been struggling
mhm.
as well. They've had their fair share of issues. But in terms of the managers that have really impressed me, Dean Smith, I think, has done a complete 180 from last
Yeah, and
season. And I think with Hansen Huddle, Dean Smith, and hopefully Arteta, I think it goes to show that sometimes you do have to just back a manager. Um, a manager can be good while still getting bad results. Unai Emery is having a fantastic time at Villarreal right now. He had, like a 19-game unbeaten streak, I think, that he's still in. And he obviously is a talented manager. It didn't work out at Arsenal. I'm not saying that he should have been given more time at all, but I am just saying that this new environment of the Premier League, and I think it's something that really started with Chelsea and the way that they handle their business, has become very chop and change in terms of manager appointments. I think even Pochettino, I was pretty surprised to see him leave. Right, Ranieri was a pretty big firing after he had obviously done so much for that Leicester side. So I think the ownerships feel that, if you're not going to be able to compete in the short term, then we're not going to give you the chance to compete in the long term. And that's not always the best strategy.
yeah, all credit to Dean Smith, and also I think in the Crystal Palace game, we can't forget that Wilfred Zaha drew a red card on Tyrone
He
Mings
seemed
before
so angry
halftime.
recently. It's like I'm a little concerned for how stuff is
Yeah,
going for him, because
yeah,
if you watch a game, it's not just that red card. It's almost every single play. He's got his arms up in the air and he's like screaming at people, and you can tell people
yeah. Well,
around him are kind of
he
like surprised almost that he's so angry.
yeah, and the 3-0 loss to Villa. He actually was able to draw the red card on Mings, and then they played the rest of the game a man up for 45 minutes. Yes, they're down 1-0 because Bertrand Traore scored a nice goal in the 5th minute, but you would expect them not to lose 3-0
You
after
cut out a little bit
having it.
there for a second. My bad.
No worries. Yeah, I was just saying that surprising that with Mings out, one of their best defenders, they were still able to score 2 goals against the Crystal Palace team that, blew it,
Yeah,
absolutely
and I
blew it
mean
with a man up.
they actually attained, I think, the highest expected goal total in a single half, like after they got the red card. So they look phenomenal, and I think that goes to show it's like not only are they working so hard, but they are truly playing very good soccer. They're creating a lot of opportunities. They're making it really hard to break them down, and they're just a great two-way team. So I wouldn't be surprised if they could have maybe not a Leicester-esque year and go on and win the title or anything, but I do think that they might turn some heads in the fact that this form is not, temporary, and I could see them pushing on for definitely, Europa League spots at the very least towards the end of the season, because I don't think when you look down the table that, some of these other teams, right, they have 2 games in hand on a lot of teams here.
Yeah,
For them to be ahead of Chelsea at this point in
with
the
two
league,
games.
pretty much halfway through the season, and they have 2 games in hand is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and their form has been spectacular. Their expected goals is, very high. So it's very positive from
And
Dean
I
Smith.
mean, it's
And
almost like very similar. What has happened to Aston Villa has almost happened in reverse to Sheffield United. This point last season, Sheffield United was a lot higher up the table than anybody expected. They had an away record which was unparalleled, pretty much undefeated away from home. Just really, really strong performance. And this season, right, they have lost every single match except for 2. They've just been incredibly woeful. And it's right. We saw Aston Villa last season be 1 goal disallowed away from getting relegated, and this season they're vying for being one of the best teams in the league. And Sheffield last season were right up with the best of them, and this season it seems like they'll be lucky if they don't have one of the worst Premier League seasons in history.
absolutely tough for Sheffield, fantastic from Dean Smith and Aston Villa, and I think they can really, really do something and have a great season in terms of potentially qualifying for some sort of European competition. That's definitely on the cards for them at this point, and very exciting if you're an Aston Villa fan.
Yeah, and I think we've pretty much covered most of the action that we wanted to get through with all of those games. Manchester City unfortunately weren't able to play both, so not as much to cover on their end. But I know that there are a lot of things that happened through the calendar year of 2020, which was kind of an unprecedented year. We've been flicking through some of the stats, obviously with Wan-Bissaka being at the top of the tackles, Bruno Fernandes being at the top of the chances created, Olivier Giroud beating out Tammy Abraham in a Chelsea team that has had strike problems with, the best expected goals per 90 in the calendar year, I think is one of the most interesting stats of the
Yeah,
year, right? Like, why do Chelsea have striker problems when literally Giroud and Tammy Abraham are the best strikers in the league at creating expected goal chances per 90?
yeah.
It's pretty wild.
I read from this article from the Athletic that Giroud, he's known as the super sub, but in this amount of minutes, only 120. This is 1,095 minutes. Only 120 are
We're from
from
starts.
substitute.
Oh, are from substitutes. So
Are
most
from
of us are from
substitute.
starts.
Yeah,
It's definitely, right. The cutoff there is 900 plus minutes. You look at down at Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I think if you look at everybody, I think his is probably the most impressive performance, right? He's played pretty much 3 times the amount of all the players on top of him. And I think, right, anybody can be in form. We used to see Chicharito have incredible per 90 metrics, but when you're looking at Giroud and Abraham, they're pretty much sharing. And I don't think if they played as many minutes, they would be able to keep that output high. So I would say that probably over the course of the 2020 year, we've seen Calvert-Lewin, and I would even go as far to say Jamie Vardy, even though he's a little bit farther down the list, being the 2 most on target, clinical, dangerous strikers, at least in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the one super sub on this, for the super sub striker, and you kind of have to think of like where did, the days of Edin Dzeko go, where he was at Manchester City and they had, four strikers. There's no really super subs. I guess Cavani has kind of been working it in when Ole hasn't started him. He's come on and done well, but yeah, Nacho just sneaking in there at 902 minutes with the .49. I think he's got to give a shout for a good super sub.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you could almost give the title to Gabi Jesus, but really, with Aguero's injuries, he's more of an alternate and less of
Mhm.
a super sub. They don't really sub him in that much. He just, obviously isn't the first choice. But Ihe Nacho is really a mystery player. I think even at
Yeah,
City, you could tell he had so much ability. Was never going to get a chance, so he went to Leicester to get more minutes, and Leicester are probably the most dependent team on a single player, and that player is obviously Jamie Vardy. And how can you blame them? It's
Mhm.
funny to see Ihe Iheanacho is a little bit more dangerous than him in the time that he's been given, but obviously nobody is as clinical as Jamie Vardy. So that .47 expected goals per 90 is basically like a guaranteed goal for him because of just his pure finishing ability, probably the best, finisher and I would just say clutch player in
Mhm.
the league. And
Mhm.
he shows that time and time again with his statistics against the top six, where he's, one of the most prolific strikers once he gets in front of those big boy teams.
Yeah, Vardy is deadly, so deadly, and that's what we see in the stats. It doesn't take much for him to get one, and as soon as they break, it's just over. And that's why Leicester have been doing so well this season. Um, but also, I think we gotta talk about interceptions and reflecting on the Premier League and how you know we see N'Golo Kante here. Obviously being N'Golo Kante, doing his thing as he always does, possession adjusted interceptions. This is retrieving possession after intercept or after a tackle.
And
Um,
basically, the way that they adjust by possession is like if you're a team like Manchester City and you have all the possession, they're not going to take a per 90 of how many interceptions you get because you're not going to intercept it from your own team, right? But if you're somebody, playing on like a Newcastle side who obviously has no possession, then the whole game, you could potentially be intercepting the ball. So that's why,
right, right.
N'Golo Kante is so impressive here is because Chelsea do often dominate in possession, and then in that small window where he is able to win the ball back, nobody does it better. And I think everybody can see that he's all over the field. Matty Cash, I think, has been amazing in his season so far, and I'm not surprised at all to see him up there, as well as Calvin Phillips, right, rounding out that top three. He is one of the most pivotal players for this Leeds team and how they play. He's so good at enforcing their press. We've seen a shift in the Premier League with the addition of Hansen Huddle and Klopp. Um, I think really Klopp being the proponent of it, but obviously Pep has a similar press. But you can't not have a pressing mentality in some phases of the game, which I think really you did not see in past years. And I think this is expressing itself in the fact that a lot of these players, I think, would have gone under the radar in previous years. With Conte is an exception just because he does everything so theatrically and he's all over the pitch and you see him all the time. But I think right, those top three players, Conte, Phillips, and Didi, these are players that I think everybody in the league is respecting because there has been this shift towards the appreciation of the press and how important it is to have ball winning players in that midfield.
And we see that reflected in the presses per defensive action stats with Leeds showing here up at the top above Liverpool. And so obviously, we've seen that in the way and the style that Leeds play. But something that I saw from this athletic article, and credit to them with these statistics that we're showing you guys today. But Southampton has a higher PPDA, presses per defensive action, than Liverpool. Not by much, but this um, or I'm sorry, lower rather. So, this is something that,
You just
we've
cut out
talked
a
about a lot.
second there. You want to say that again?
Right. I was just showing this that Southampton is showing, they're more aggressive in pressing than Liverpool in terms of PPDA.
Yeah, everybody thinks I think of Liverpool, City, Leeds of being, the big proponents of the press, but I'm also surprised to see Chelsea up there. They have a lot of young, enthusiastic players. Mason Mount, I think, is probably a big portion of that. He's really changed how they play. But Southampton and Hansen Huddle, their press is relentless, and they play really, really positively. And you see that with Brighton too, right? A team that maybe you wouldn't expect to be so high up the press. But I also don't think it is a coincidence when you look at this sheet. It almost is a direct correlation for how offensive a team plays, right? Leeds, Southampton, Liverpool, Manchester City, the teams that are at the top of that are teams that get a lot
Attack.
of chances created and they're on the front foot and they're trying to attack, right? And you wouldn't normally in your mind think of a press as being an offensive action, but as Klopp always says, right, like the
It
best,
is. Yeah.
substitute for a number 10 is a good press. I'd rather have, you know, a really strong press than a creative player. And all of these teams that are at the bottom of the list are these teams that sit way back and defend, and try to play on the counter and are a lot more negative, right? The Newcastles, the West Hams, um, the Wolverhampton Wanderers of the world, right, are not looking to press because they're trying to sink back into that position, and they're not, like we talked about, those United goals that they scored the other day. They're not looking to do that really shitty sandwich where you're pressing in the front but then dropping back. It's just
Mhm.
like you invite way too much space. You need to be compact. So I think Leeds have done a really good job of just shaking up the Premier League and just being really exciting. And I'm a big fan of the you know the league shift towards a pressing, because it's really exciting to watch. It forces a lot of turnovers and it just makes games move quicker for the fans, I think. And it's also obviously very effective.
And my favorite part about this stat is how emblematic it is, of the coach's style of play. Like you were saying, it's very telling when these guys are at the top and you see these guys at the bottom. The outliers are, you can tell. You can put a
It,
name to each.
I'm
In
surprised to
terms of
see
the ones
Aston Villa so low because they really do press, but this is for the 2020
for
calendar year.
2020.
And
Yeah.
so you have
So
to think that
mhm.
Aston Villa, um, Arsenal, and even I think Tottenham are probably higher than realistically they would be, because they have had a tendency, especially this season, to sit very, very deep. I think last season they were still kind of fighting off the urge to do that press that Pochettino had impressed in them so much, and that would be the biggest stylistic change, I would say, between Tottenham and under Mourinho and under Pochettino. But it is really interesting. I think you're seeing some success from these teams that are sitting back this year, more so than other years. Like West Ham, we've seen them have a lot of success. Tottenham have obviously seen a lot of success with this style, and it can be really, really, if you have the right players and you have the right mentality, and most importantly, if you have the right results, because it's something that can only happen if you have the momentum and the morale of the team high and everybody bought in, right? It can be really devastating for teams like Leeds, like Manchester City, that put all of their players forward. If you can absorb that pressure and then release, a Sun into space, then you could, totally devastate teams.
Right. And you know, emblematic pressing styles from Bielsa, Hasenhüttl, Klopp. I'd love to see it from the lower, you know, teams. Being above Liverpool, it's always good to see. When some teams can come in like Bielsa has with that influence and just completely change the league. It's fantastic. So
Yeah, and
um,
we've been over a lot of stuff
yeah.
here. The last thing that I'm gonna want you to pull up before we just do a little, looking forward here, is the dribbles chart that we
Oh yeah, the house favorite.
curated. I think everybody loves a dribbler. Um, it's kind of a reprieve for a lot of fans who have teams that aren't winning, and don't score a lot of goals is that they have dribblers. Right here at the top, we see Wolves
Alan.
and Newcastle with Saint Maximin and Adama Traore. I don't think anybody is surprised to see the two of those up there. Not only is Adama at the top, but he averages a whole, 2 dribbles more than Saint Maximin, who averages, pretty much 2 more than everybody else below. And then we see a couple of players around the same. I'm surprised to see Mikel Antonio up so high. I think you don't usually think of him as being, similar to a Saint Maximin or a Pulisic who have, or a Zaha who can dribble through players. He's really more of like a somebody who relies on his pace and his strength to get by people, but get by them he does, obviously. But what really excites me about this list as an Arsenal fan is Buendia, who obviously has not been in the Premier League since last season, staking a claim there, somebody that Arsenal have been looking at, and who I think has a lot of creative potential and does, there's not a single Arsenal player on this list. Most of these players, you have to say, though, are from worse teams where they have space to run in behind. You can't really dribble if there's 8 people in the box. There's no City players. Obviously City have some of the best dribblers. Pulisic being so high up just goes to show how important of a player he is, that he can still dribble in those tight spaces. And I think that's why he's proven to be so quality and probably Chelsea's most dangerous player, because in the box, he is still deadly and he can still get beyond people because of how quick he is and his balance and his ability to shift directions, um, as well as Diogo
One
Jota, right?
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out on this is, we look at all of these players, they're nearly all of them are outside players, either wingers or we see one left back in Masuaku, but he's also
Yeah,
played
he plays kind
advanced.
of like, pretty
Yeah, and a left
advanced.
midfielder. But the only really center midfielder we have is my man
Zombo,
Zombo and Gisa, and he's really fun to watch if you've never paid attention to Fulham games and you're looking for
he's
something
wild.
not only Lookman but Zombo. He's playing in the center of the field. He's kind of almost like a Yaya Toure light in terms of how he tries to take people on. Obviously not as quality as Yaya, but he's got the dribbles, and you love to see that kind of player. And
He's like
so
he's like a crazy Dembele. He's like if Musa
yeah,
Dembele for Spurs like was totally crazy. he he reminds me a lot of Yves Bissouma, the Brighton midfielder, where it's like everything he's doing is 100 miles an hour and he has a lot of technical ability, but then he also just has, an elephant touch sometimes and can be totally all over the place. So he's a really exciting player that I think should polish nicely if, he keeps getting the minutes that he has been in the Premier League. Um, but I mean, these have been, some of the most exciting players in the Premier League this season, and I think they make it exciting to watch. You look at those numbers for Adama Traore; he's dribbling somebody pretty much, you know, 10 times every game. Every 9 minutes, he's dribbling somebody. How many times does he even get the freaking ball? This like
yeah.
pretty much every time he gets the ball, he's dribbling at least one person. Um, and he does go on those mazy runs, and he's really exciting to watch. Wolves don't play him as much as I thought they were going to this season. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw people sniffing around Adama Traore just because statistically he is an anomaly. And
Absolutely.
this January transfer window could be really um, have some things, some moving parts. There are a lot of teams that I think are going to want to capitalize on the fact that the table is so close, and they think, maybe a player here, a player there might put them over the edge in being able to get into those Champions League spots or, top half of the table or wherever they want to be. Arsenal will definitely be looking to bring in some players. There's been rumors about them looking at Buendia. As we said, there's been rumors about them looking at Sabitzer as well as Julian Brandt. So definitely something to watch. Edu, the technical director, has mentioned that he wants to bring in a creative player in that number 10 role. Kolasinac, it's been confirmed that he's going back to Schalke, which I think represents the biggest piece, opportunity for Arsenal is that by June, they should be getting rid of £750,000 per week from their wage bill. When you think of teams where, Harry Kane is getting it took him a very long time to get into the 150K per week, 200K per week. And that's like the top player. You're looking at a lot of teams where most of the players are under 100K per week. And Arsenal are freeing up 750,000 pounds per week by the end of the summer. That is going to be immense for Arteta if he's still in the managerial role to obviously bring in some of his own players. Arsenal have been limited by not only the size of their squad, but the wage bill itself. There are a lot of rules on how much you can extend the wage year on year. And obviously, financially, it doesn't make sense to have so much dead weight and then bring on new players. So we should see, kind of a changing of guard at Arsenal in 2021 that I think is going to be, really pivotal in the direction that they go. But there's definitely a lot of things that are going to be coming up in 2021 that are going to be defining for a lot of teams, right? We have Manchester City signed on Pep, but we know, it looks like Sergio Aguero is going to be leaving at the end of the season. They haven't agreed to a new contract yet. There's been rumors about Harry Kane, a bid there that seems unlikely to
Yeah, I've seen that.
materialize, but it does signify that Manchester City have had Aguero as being their talisman for a decade now, probably along with David Silva, who left last season, the two names that are synonymous with the club. You think of Manchester City, you think of that Aguero goal that, beat Manchester United, you think of David Silva, um, you think of Yaya Toure and company, and now all of those players will be probably gone at the beginning of next season. And we're going to see a completely different spine going forward for this Manchester City that's going to start from the tip. It doesn't look like Gabriel Jesus has what Manchester City want in terms of their star striker. I see them bringing in not another young player to challenge him, but an experienced player along the lines of a Harry Kane or a top striker. So definitely a space to watch to see how they move forward, because they have been struggling in front of goal, but they have not been struggling in terms of creating chances. So that could kind of push them back into that upper echelon of untouchable if they do their business correctly.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting rebuild for Manchester City going forward. With them backing Pep, I think that's the right move. I don't think the Harry Kane rumor is very substantiated in terms of the post was from the one of the top journalists at Build who said that this is rumor of the week, and he said 100 million, so 89 million pounds when Harry Maguire is going for 80. I don't see Daniel Levy really doing that, selling into a direct rival. But who knows? With COVID, clubs need money. Um, Spurs got a really big backing by English taxpayers in terms of the loan they received. Um, so anything could happen, but
I mean, Harry Kane, I think, has done so well under Mourinho and has really kind of reinvented himself in a role that I think seems a little more um, like it has longevity to it. Like he could be playing this role for a long time. It's not that physically demanding of him, and he does it very well with that partnership that he has with Son. I would be surprised if either of them left, unless Jose Mourinho got the bag or something. And I think in 2021, Tottenham need to basically win something. I mean, right? It's been on just out of reach for a while now. They've brought Jose Mourinho in to win titles. They brought him in at the beginning of 2020, right? Or maybe right at the end of 2019. He's had a year now. We're getting into the business end of the season in 2021 for Spurs. I don't think they need a ton of additions. I think they have a good team, maybe a number 10. I'm not, I think they're pretty good in terms of offensive players. Bale, I don't think is working out, but they have enough wingers and offensive players that it doesn't really matter. Vinicius looks like a good pickup. Reguilon looks like a good pickup. Højbjerg has obviously been a big part, but I think moving forward, they need these players to bring home some silverware. They need Jose to turn it on. But other
yeah,
than that, it's been positive from Spurs over the past year. Obviously, it's been a transition period from Pochettino to Jose, but I think they look good going into 2021. But we've said that before, and they definitely need to add something to the trophy cabinet.
agreed. And just to stir the rumor mill a bit more, there was an exclusive interview out today from The Athletic with Sammy Khedira talking about his desire to return to the Premier League. He's not played a full 90 minutes since September 2019, but you may remember his previous work under both Premier League managers currently, Jose Mourinho and Carlo Ancelotti. And Sammy Khedira is one of the most decorated players out there. So,
I mean,
who
has
knows
he's
if
been
he
on
can.
Juventus these past 2 seasons, right? How many games has
Yeah,
he
and
played?
so he's not played very many games, but they've won a ton of trophies. And in the interview, he's talking about how he's very happy there, and he's making tons of money, training with the best players in the world. But he's hungry, and the Premier League is the one competition he's not been a part of, and he really wants to go there. So I think there
I don't
might
think
be a
that would be
link
a great
to.
move for Tottenham, I have to say.
I don't
I wouldn't
either,
be
and I
excited about it.
I am hoping if he does move, it would be to Everton and not to Spurs.
Would
Um,
be interesting for him to link up with Khedira for sure. I mean, I think in terms of 2021, we're hoping that, you know, it'll be a little bit less, like a little more stable. Hopefully we'll have the vaccine and things will be safer for people and we won't have to worry about safety as much. And we can bring the fans back in to the stadiums and just have a little bit more regularity about everything. I think we're looking for, right, the FA to do better in terms of how they've responded to racism. We're looking for VAR situation to change. That offside rule is fucking terrible. Um, and I think the Premier League each season in recent years has just gotten better and better. With this current season, we have so many superpowers in the league. There's just so much talent. And with Ronaldo and Messi kind of coming to the end of their careers, I think La Liga has been less of a desired destination. And the Premier League is just going to continue to absorb, more and more high quality players as it moves forward. I'm hoping that the changes of foreign and work permit rules, moving forward are not going to inhibit that too much because it has been really exciting to watch the Premier League this last year. And I'm looking forward highly to seeing how everything shakes up in 2021. Hopefully everything will be a little bit less dramatic next year.
yeah, and we hope that the virus, can subside and that all these different variants of it, we can somehow get a hold of it. So everybody, thank you for listening and watching today, and we hope you stay safe and have a really happy New Year and a safe 2021. And we will see you next year.
Yeah, happy New Year, guys. We'll see you next week. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe at Double Shot of Tea on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We're all over the place, and we love watching the Premier League and creating content for everybody. So, see you next year, and happy New Year's to you too, buddy.
Yeah, happy New Year, bro. Take care.